All right, I think we're live, guys. Welcome to everyone who's joining us live. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much whoever's watching us later on and listening to this as a podcast. I've got a very special episode for you guys today because I've got a very special guest, somebody that I've been following for a while, but I'm very happy I have the chance to speak to her today. I'm talking, of course, about Yasmine Mohammed. She has a new book out. She's an ex-Muslim human rights activist and writer. She has a new book out, Unveiled, How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. We're going to be talking to her about all of that stuff. But before we get into it, please welcome to the show, Yasmine Mohammed. Yasmine, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And, I was reading your book last week, and parts of your book make for an unpleasant read. Not because it's a bad book, because it's a really good book. But it's an unpleasant read in parts because it's a real story of a real person that in the Western context happened right under the nose of one of the most progressive sort of Western societies. That's why it's a harrowing, sort of unpleasant read. And before we really deep dive into it and pick at it a little more, tell us, for people that might not know about you or your work, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background, and then we'll dive a little deeper into it.
Okay, so essentially I was born and raised in Canada, but to a very religious family. So my mom and her husband were fundamentalist Muslims, the kind of people that would admire the Muslim Brotherhood or admire the Mujahideen in Afghanistan or jihadis in general, and who felt that they just didn't have the courage to join in and pick up a sword for themselves, but they were right behind those people, supporting them and cheering them on. And so that was the world that I grew up in, waking up at, before, just at the crack of dawn and doing my prayers, and then having to stay up before it's time to go to school. So you have to just read Quran and then go to school when you're sleep deprived. And so that was my life. Hijab was put on me at 9 years old. I went to Islamic schools, and eventually I was forced into a marriage after high school because that's what happens. It's a very typical story.
Right.
And luckily I had a daughter with him, and realized that he was a terrorist. He was a jihadi, a member of Al-Qaeda.
Right.
And was able to get myself and my daughter away from him, and then was able to get away from my family and go to university and start my life over again. And I was living as an ex-Muslim quietly, just minding my own business for all these years, until I started to see these really dangerous things happening in my country and beyond, all over the world. Because I grew up with one foot in the Islamic world and one foot in the Western world, I think that I could really see the miscommunication and the very dangerous things that were going on. Especially something like the Charlie Hebdo attack, for example. When that happened, the immediate reaction from the West should have been, well, this is free speech and we condemn these terrorists. But instead, I was hearing ridiculous things like, well, maybe they shouldn't have been drawing Muhammad.
Right.
Well, that was disrespectful. And I just could not believe my eyes and ears. The Salman Rushdie affair, just the way the West was responding to radical Islam, to extremists, to terrorists, to fundamentalists. The way they were responding was incredibly different from the way that they would respond if those fundamentalists were coming from a Christian background, for example.
Right.
And so that's what made me decide to finally speak out.
Yeah, reading the book, I can imagine some people sort of making the claim when they listen to your story. I can see them pushing back and saying, well, what happened with you was horrible because clearly you got dealt a horrendous card, right? That's what happened with you. So the way your family behaved with you, the way your ex-husband behaved with you, that was because you just got dealt a terrible card. But something that you said again, I heard your chat with Sam Harris, and it was great, and I encourage everyone to go listen to it. But one of the things that he said, and you said as well, was that, well, yes, it is true that you got dealt a terrible card, but at the same time, the things that your family did to you, every time they did this to you, they kind of attributed some kind of scriptural permission for that this is what the scriptures say. So what I'm doing, I am well within my rights to do so. And that was something that really struck out to me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Not just well within their rights, but they are following the instructions from the all-knowing, all-powerful creator of the universe, right? He's the one that told men, if you fear disobedience or arrogance from your wives, beat them. So this is what they're instructed to do. This isn't like, this is the thing, is there seems to be this pervasive idea that Muslim people are just psychopaths, and they all want to go around murdering each other and beating their wives and beating their children. And so they're just using this religion as an excuse to carry out these atrocities.
Right.
Now, we would never make that same assumption, again, if we were talking about somebody from a Christian background. So let me talk about a Jehovah's Witness parent, for example. If they decide, I'm not going to give a blood transfusion to my daughter, and I know my daughter is going to die from that, but that is what my God wants, and that is what my religion instructs. So that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to allow my daughter to die. You would never look at that Jehovah's Witness parent and say, what a psychopathic maniac. Yeah. They just want to kill their child, and they're using their religion as an excuse. Nobody would say that about them. Yep. But why do they say that about people from a Muslim background? They're not psychopathic maniacs. They're normal human beings just like you and me, but they have been indoctrinated. They have been taught that the best example of humanity, that the best person that they could possibly be to reach the highest levels of heaven is to be a jihadi.
Right.
So that is what they are being taught from when they are children. So of course, a certain percentage of those people are going to grow up to become terrorists. So that's, I think, a really important thing to say when people say to me, oh, well, this was just your story and this was just your experience. Of course, it's my story. Of course, it's my experience. But we all know that everything that happened to me, these themes are incredibly common. Right? I'm not the only child to be beat up because I didn't pray and because I didn't read Quran. You can just go on YouTube and see the horrific ways children are being treated. I can't even share those videos because they just bring up so much emotion in me. Yeah. Not just in Islamic schools, but by their parents as well. And again, because there's a hadith that tells parents to beat their children if they do not pray. Yeah. So these parents are just following what their religion tells them to do, and they think that it makes them good people.
Yeah. Another thing that so stuck out to me, again, reading your book, is that despite what you were going through in your family life, in your personal life, for a very long time, you were afraid to take some action against it or to move away from that situation because you had this genuine fear of, sort of the afterlife and what is Allah going to think when I move away, if I do something that my mother doesn't approve of, and what will happen when I die and I go to hell. And that's something that, people discount that and people scoff at it and people turn their noses up at it. That's not really a real thing. But, reading your book, and I've done other interviews with other ex-Muslims as well. And one of the things that I've realized is this is a very genuine fear that Muslims have in their heads, believing Muslims, have in their heads, that something like me, I can't understand it. Coming from my cultural background, like it doesn't make sense to me, because my parents used to say when I was a kid that, hey, if you do bad things, you'll go to hell. And I was like, all right. And then when I grow up and I talk to them, they're like, it's just, we just say that to kids, whatever.
Oh,
so
nice.
it's not like my parents don't believe that stuff, that you're going to go to hell and burn for eternity. So it's just something that in Western countries, I believe, and maybe in India, you say something to your kids to like make them behave better. But when they grow up, they're like, yeah, that stuff's it's not
Yeah.
really a thing.
So we would get sit down and told in morbid graphic detail exactly how we would suffer.
Right.
So there's adab al-qabr, which means to be punished in the grave. So when you die, you have these specific kind of punishments that happen to you in the grave leading up to the day of judgment. So even before you enter hell, while you're in the grave waiting,
Right.
you're still going to be, all sorts of things are happening to you, right?
Right.
You're getting attacked by these snakes that are, your body is being squished, like all sorts of stuff like that. And then, like, let's say, for example, the hijab, like women are supposed to cover their hair. They don't just say, cover your hair from men. No. Prophet Muhammad has a hadith where he describes, if you do not cover your hair from men, you will be hung by your hair in hell and your brain will boil. So, hearing this as a little girl being told, make the choice, make a decision. This is the hijab. If you wear it, you will be good and pious and you'll go to heaven and everybody will love you and talk about how wonderful you are. You'll make your parents proud. You'll make Allah proud. Don't wear it. Right. Not only are you going to burn in hell, but I'm going to specifically explain to you how you're going to burn in hell and then how you're going to suffer in the world too, because everybody is going to treat you like a dirty whore because only dirty whores don't cover their head.
Wow.
So, and then they say it's a choice.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
We're
very, very versed in how we will suffer. We're being told, if you've read the Quran, it's incredibly violent. It's constantly going on about how Allah is all powerful and how he will punish the non-believers and punish the hypocrites. And even to have a thought in your head that might be different from what you're allowed to think, you are terrified that thought even entered your mind because you're like, oh my God, now Allah knows that I'm doubting, that I'm actually thinking, maybe I shouldn't revere a man who raped a 9-year-old girl. Maybe I actually see something wrong with that. And it's like, you're terrified that you actually had that thought because now you're going to have to get punished for it, for being so arrogant to think that you have, a better moral compass than the prophet of Allah,
Right. Another thing that really I thought was interesting was, when you were in that situation, there's parts in the book where you mentioned that you felt like this was just happening to you. It was just your nightmare alone, and you were just suffering through this. And this is something that you have to go through.
Yeah.
What was it like when you were able to get your hands on the internet and you were able to meet other people and were like, wow, there's a lot of me out there?
Yeah. So the reason why you feel so alone is because everybody's too afraid to speak up. I was afraid to speak up too. There could have been cousins and friends all around me feeling the same way, but you don't talk about it because you don't even think it, let alone say it out loud, right? So, wow, when I found people on the internet, it's like finding your family. It was just unbelievable. It's euphoric. And there's a real honeymoon period in the beginning where you just feel like you're not alone anymore. It's everything to find other ex-Muslims. And so that's why I think it's incredibly important for us to be very vocal and for us to share our faces and share our names and share our stories, because I don't want anyone ever, anywhere in this world to feel that dark, intense loneliness that I felt, because, I went through this before social media was a thing. Yeah. So
I feel like even today, there's so many people that when they come out and when they say, okay, I don't believe anymore and I can say it freely, one of the things that they say, even like kids that you would think are very social media savvy and that know everything about it, even they come out and say, man, I felt so alone for such a long time. And now I feel like I've found something.
Yeah, I describe it sort of like a school of fish or like sheep, right? Flock. You all move together in unison in the same direction. Nobody's thinking about which direction to move in. You all just kind of move together. And so to be that one person in that school of fish or in that flock of sheep, to have doubts and to want to move in a different direction, it's really, really scary. And so
it's almost like you feel this, that there's something wrong with you initially, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you isolate yourself. You get filled with a lot of self-hate, right? Because you just feel like, why can't I fit in? Why can't I just join in with everybody else? Why do I have to keep on having these doubts? In Islam, they say it's the devil whispering in your ear. So you really feel like it's the devil, telling you these things, when in actuality, that's what is called critical thought, but critical thought is the devil.
Right.
So you isolate yourself, you don't feel, even though other ex-Muslims exist online and stuff like that, you don't feel like you want to join in with that for a very long time, because you're scared of it. You're scared of what it means. I can't tell you. It's hilarious and sad how many times Muslims will come to my page, not realizing initially that I'm an ex-Muslim,
right,
liking a comment or making a comment, and then I'll say something back, and then they'll be like, "You're ex-Muslim?" Block. They block me because they're just afraid, like, oh no, my God, I just agreed with an ex-Muslim,
right.
Like the devil herself. And so it's too scary because of the cost of that, right? Like if they start to question or if they start to doubt, they're going to get ostracized by their family and they're going to burn in hell and they're going to this and that and the other thing. And so they don't want to question it. They don't want to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I just feel like that's such a unique experience again. And it's a situation that's not very dissimilar to other sort of rights movements as well. I remember that in the 60s and it again boggles my mind when you have liberals in these Western countries who don't look at it this way. For instance, you had the LGBTQ rights movement a few decades ago, where you had people that were telling these LGBTQ people that, well, if you feel the way you feel, there's something wrong with you. We need to correct you. And if somebody today says that to an LGBTQ person, you're going to turn around and say, well, that's incredibly bigoted because you don't understand what the hell's going on here, right? That's what any liberal will say. If you say, well, LGBTQ people are, there's something mentally wrong with them. But then that's the feeling that a lot of ex-Muslims are growing up with. That's what they've been told, that, well, if you're having these thoughts, there's something wrong with you. And it boggles my mind that liberals don't see the connection there. There's just no connection there. And it brings me to another thing that I wanted to talk about that for me was the biggest sort of gut punch in the book, for me personally reading it, was the experience you had with the legal system in Canada, where you were like, all right, I am now in a situation in a progressive society. The situation is now in the law's hands. It's in the court's hands. And in a progressive society, in a democratic society, they will do the right thing. And they don't. I'm not going to tell the entire story. I'd rather people read it in the book, but they don't. And reading that, I was nervous reading up to the sort of decision while I was reading the book. I was like, oh my God. And then when it happens, it was like a real gut punch. So reading it, I can tell you what happened to me. Going through it must be a completely different experience, but that must have, I can't help but think that really shook your faith in the society that you grew up in.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Because, so again, if we go back to that analogy of the school of fish, if you can just imagine how difficult it would be for a 13-year-old girl to essentially, you're being taught your whole life that these are the enemy. So that, they're the sharks in the water. And I'm turning around from my safe school of fish and I'm turning to the shark and I'm saying, can you help me?
Right.
Can you help me get away from this school of fish? So that's really how it felt to me, because I was being told they're the enemy. And so I left my safe family And I went to the enemy and I said, I need help.
Yes.
So that was really hard enough to overcome. But then to have the judge, you don't want to give it away too much, but to have things turn out so negatively, to have my own country betray me like that, it made me feel like, well, then there's absolutely no hope in the world.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to get any support in my community. And now I'm not going to get support from my society for outside of my community. So that's it. I'm fucked.
Yeah.
I'm done. So I fell into a really deep depression after that, where I just accepted that I cannot change what Allah wants to happen.
Yeah.
Allah wants me to be in this house, and he wants me to continue to be abused. And there's no way I'm going to be able to change that, because I'm nothing but a lowly human. And I just stopped trying. I gave up. I submitted. That's the word.
Right.
Islam, the definition of Islam is submission. And literally, if you go read my book, it sort of feels like just this constant me standing up and then being forced to submit, and then standing up again and then being forced to submit. And, you know, I looked back on my life and I realized, like, wow, that was just that's the theme, right? That's the prominent reoccurring theme of Islam, just trying to get me to submit.
Yeah.
You know, and unfortunately in that situation, it was the judicial system of Canada that helped them in that endeavor. And that's why the subtitle to my book is How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. Because what that judge did at that point is he empowered my parents. He empowered my family. He empowered my continuing abuse and subjugation.
Right.
He empowered them to be able to push me into that marriage with the jihadi. He's the one who allowed all of that to happen. Now, if I had a conversation with him, he would think that he was being a good person. He would think I was being culturally sensitive, you know? But through being culturally sensitive, they end up becoming incredibly racist and empowering the victims of Islam. Yeah, empowering the oppressors of Islam.
Like you're coming from, you know, they're coming from a good place. I understand that. But what's happening now is that we're in a situation where, sure, you're coming from a good place, but you're doing a great disservice to a lot of people who are suffering under this. You know, there's your example, obviously. Then there's tons of other examples. Like, speaking of America, let's say, in America, we saw recently how there's high incidences of female genital mutilation in the Somali American community in Minnesota. Yep. Similarly, in the same Somali American community, you have high incidences of measles because people don't want to vaccinate their kids because it sort of goes against their religious principles. Let's shift focus to India. In India, there was a lot of debate a couple of decades ago against the practice of dowry, which is a Hindu practice which was turned into a highly exploitative practice, basically against the women. And I'm very happy there was that discussion and there were laws passed against it. And now women have to suffer a lot less under that horrible custom. So great, there was a discussion about that. But then you also have this practice in India. So if you don't know, in India, you have different legal systems for personal legal systems for Hindus and Muslims. Muslims get to have their own legal system there for at least their personal laws. So you have this system in India called triple talaq, where Muslims can just say talaq, talaq, talaq 3 times, and they can divorce their wives. And under the constitution, it's completely legal because they're allowed to have their own legal system. So you used to see these insane articles in the newspaper where somebody divorced their wife on Facebook. Somebody divorced their wife on WhatsApp. There was this joke I remember I heard when I was in school that this Muslim man took his wife to the mountains and stood on the edge of a hill and shouted talaq, and then the echo went talaq, talaq. And then, the divorce was final and he runs away. He's like, I'm done. So that was happening. And recently the government took a decision to declared the triple talaq system unconstitutional, that it has ruined thousands of Muslim women's lives, and it is time that it is declared unconstitutional. But there was so much pushback against it from the liberal community. They were like, you are trying to destroy Muslim culture by interfering, putting your nose where it doesn't belong. And I'm just like, do you not understand what this practice is?
So they're defending the oppression of these women.
Yes.
They're defending these women being treated like dirt is what they're essentially doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you push back against it, you're immediately an Islamophobe, because this is an Islamophobic thing. To declare triple talaq unconstitutional is essentially Islamophobia. So you can't raise your voice against any Islamic practice because it immediately is Islamophobia. So you're in a situation as to, what do we do for these women? Can we do anything for these women?
You know, the same sort of thing is happening in like Iran, for example, or in Pakistan, or in all of these Muslim majority countries where they try to raise the age of marriage, because of course, as we know, Prophet Muhammad married a 6-year-old.
Right.
So who are we as mere humans to say, you know, you cannot marry a child or you cannot rape a child? We can't say that because the Prophet of Allah has already made it halal. So who are we to make it haram? Right. So essentially that's what you were pushing against here with the triple talaq. Yes. Is that is as per Sharia. So if that's what the religion teaches, then they are never going to accept. So there's a phrase in Arabic that in Islam that says, what Allah has made halal, humans cannot make haram. So what Allah has made permissible, we cannot now make it non-permissible. So it will never progress. Muslims will never progress as long as they're following a 1400-year-old book.
Right.
Because they're going to say, oh, okay, well, now we have learned that this is triple talaq is detrimental to women. So let us move our world forward and start to treat women with more respect. And then they say, we can't do that. We can't do that because Sharia says that we have to treat them this way.
Right.
Same thing with the child marriage. Let's start to stop raping children now. Let's abolish that, and let's make it make the age of consent, older. Nope, can't do that. Can't do that because that is now going against Sharia. So this is the problem with when you told me that in India there are Islamic courts as well as regular secular courts. Same thing happening in the United Kingdom too, where they have Sharia courts and secular courts. That should never be allowed. It should be one law for all.
Everyone.
For everyone. When you have those Sharia courts and those Sharia laws, the people that are losing out the most are the women in those communities. And for liberals who pretend to be feminists and who pretend to care about women's rights and who pretend to care about equality, for them to support a judicial system that treats women, with such utter disdain, that is something that they need to stop and look at. So this is the problem with protecting a group just because they have brown skin or just because they're a minority group, instead of looking at what are the beliefs of that group. You know what I mean? You can't just protect Sharia because it happens to be what Muslims believe and they're brown and they're a minority, and so we have to allow them to do what they want to do. Sharia says that gay people should be thrown off of the highest roof. Right. Are you okay with that? You know what I mean? Like, make a decision based on your values and based on right and wrong, not based on the color of somebody's skin or their ethnicity or their religion. That's incredibly stupid and shallow.
Right. Well, then I have an interesting question for you, because what you said leads right into this question. Because there was a super chat here from Avinash, who was asking, a lot of Muslims will tell you, and a lot of people, liberals that defend Muslims or Islam in this case, will come out and tell you, well, you only speak about this one thing in the Quran that says throw Muslims off the top of rooftops. What about all of these wonderful passages where, there was a funeral going through and Prophet Muhammad stood up and one of his helpers said, Prophet Muhammad, that's a Jew's funeral. He's like, well, so I can still show respect to somebody's funeral. Why don't you mention any of that nice stuff, you know? Why do you only talk about... Yeah. Like, why do you
what
only
do you
talk about
fucking
the
do?
nasty
Why
stuff?
do we need to talk about that? That is basic humanity. It's like, oh, wow, he showed respect to a dead person. What's the conversation? There's nothing to talk about. Everything is okay. We talk about problems that we want to overcome. We talk about issues that we want to deal with. People say to me, who cares if Prophet Muhammad married a 6-year-old? That was a long time ago. It doesn't matter. It's a different time. It matters because girls are being raped today. That's why it matters. It matters because there's actual lives at stake. That's why it matters. I'm not just talking about these things because I feel like, you know, because I like to, because I like to put myself out there and have these death threats and all of this garbage happening in my life. I'm speaking about it because I know that there are victims under there that are not only being ignored, but that are being empowered by the West. Like, we are supposed to be the ones that are defending free thinkers and defending, you know, liberal-minded people and feminists and, you know, defending the LGBT community. That's supposed to be where we are. Instead, we're defending the exact opposite side of that. And so there needs to be a loud counter-argument to that so that people in the West can finally examine what it is that they're doing and finally notice the danger in what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this then. Do you remember a few years ago on The Daily Show? This was close to when I think Trevor Noah just took over, and he got like this athlete from the U.S. Olympic women's team, and she was the first hijabi women's athlete in the Olympics team, and she came on, and then he asked her, well, why do you wear this hijab when, you know, freedom should dictate that you can let your hair free, like, and in the Quran it says that it's for modesty's sake and all of that. So why do you wear it? And she gave an answer where she said, I do it for privatizing my sexuality, and that became like a watchword for a couple of years. And I remember when she said it, there was this huge applause in the room, and everybody on social media was like, that's right. It's women taking control of their sexuality. And I was just thinking to myself, and I'm like, this is real world. Like, I was thinking for a second, have you seen that movie Idiocracy? I was like, are we living in that movie? Is this the movie Idiocracy?
Yes, it
have
is.
I like passed out and have woken up in Idiocracy?
Yes.
I wonder, like, what do you make of
Islam? It's what the body craves.
Right. That's exactly right. What the hell's going on?
Yeah. So that was actually Dalia Mugahed who said
That's
that
right.
on the Noah Trevor Noah show, and I had the exact same reaction as you. I almost couldn't believe. I'm like, she just insulted all of these women, and they're like seals. They're like clapping for somebody who just told them that they publicized their sexuality, apparently. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, that is such a common slut shaming attitude in the Muslim world, where it's like girls who cover, they are pious and pure and good, and, you know, those that uncover are filthy, dirty whores. And she was essentially saying the same thing, and these uncovered women are clapping for it. So, I mean, it's like you see all these memes about, you know, women, liberal women that support Islam are like chickens supporting KFC or something like that. Like, literally, that's what it is. Like, how do you not see that? And how do you not see? There are so many women stuck under this ideology that want their freedom. You know, they get to, they have the internet, they have TV, they see movies, they know that there's another way to live, and they don't want to live like this anymore.
Yeah.
You know, they don't want to be told, you know, their prophet tells them women are less intelligent than men, and he equates them to dogs. You know, if they cross your path, then your prayer is null and void, and women get half the inheritance of a man. And, you know, I could go on and on and on. Right. Women are now standing up and they're saying enough. We don't want this. And these are Muslim women in Muslim majority countries. And when those women stand up, you would think that the feminists in the West who have their freedom because of brave women who have stood up before them,
Yep.
you would think that those women would reach out a hand and extend some support to these other women who are also wanting the same freedom that they have, that want the same equality that they have. But instead, they turn their backs on them. And no, they don't even turn their backs on them. What's worse is they support the people that are subjugating these women, the people that are oppressing these women. When you see, this woman that you talked about, Ibtihaj Mohammed, or, the fencing woman from the Olympics.
Right.
Let me take her as an example. So in the 2016 Olympics, she won bronze.
Right.
Okay. And another Muslim woman won a gold medal. Now, Hillary Clinton, wanting to celebrate Muslim women now in the Olympics, who does she choose to celebrate? You'd think the woman that won gold or the woman that won bronze? She could not give less of a fuck who won gold and who won bronze. All she cared about was that this one is covering her head. So I'm going to tweet about her and celebrate her. Nike comes running along and they say, woo, we're going to put a swoosh on her hijab. And then Mattel comes running along and they say, oh, and we're going to make a Barbie out of her. God. She is being absolutely celebrated all over American politics and American corporations because of the fact that she is wearing the clothing of a fundamentalist Muslim. Meanwhile, other American Muslim women are degraded. They're not as important. They're not as valued. Even when she's the one that won gold, she was completely ignored. So when these Muslim women in the Muslim world, like in Iran, when she takes off her hijab and she gets thrown in prison for 15 years or more, you know what I mean? Like that woman is seeing in the West, this piece of cloth that just got me imprisoned in the West is being sold in Banana Republic, is being put on Barbie's head, is being sold at Marks and Spencer, is on the cover of Sports Illustrated. It is absolutely disgusting that this tool of misogyny that is getting women imprisoned and getting women killed, not just in the Muslim world, all over the world, is being celebrated by so-called feminists and so-called liberals. That in the Women's March, the poster was of a hijabi woman. I mean, it just... And then there's hijab days across campuses, right? Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. It's just shocking ignorance, shocking stupidity, and such dangerous hypocrisy. And you mentioned the hijab, World Hijab Day. That's exactly why I started No Hijab Day. Right. Which is also on February 1st. And so I've been doing No Hijab Day for the past 2 years, and I'm looking forward to doing it again this year. And it's just a day where we celebrate all of those women that don't want to wear hijab, that get treated like dirt from their family and their community and their societies because of the fact that they want to choose what they put on their own bodies. Those are the women, those are the warriors. Those are the Gloria Steinems. Those are the women that were burning their bras in the 60s. These are, and way more. I mean, let's be honest, right? Women in America, when they were fighting for their freedoms, nobody was killing them in the streets the way they're being killed in the streets in these countries, right? None of them were being thrown in prison for 15 years or more, or being like what's happening to Lujain al-Haflul in Saudi Arabia for asking for women to have the right to drive. She's getting thrown in prison. She's still in prison. She's being sexually assaulted in prison. She's being tortured. And where are the feminists? Where are the counterparts to these women that have power? All of these, like Ellen DeGeneres and Alyssa Milano and Sheryl Sandberg, and and Melinda Gates, that all of these women that pretend to care about women, why aren't they supporting these women that are literally dying for their freedom?
What is the liberal reaction to, or the feminist reaction to someone like you? Because for all intents and purposes, you're a liberal. Like, I consider myself a liberal as well, because all the things that the liberals support, I support by and large. It's just that you differ with them on this one thing. So for all intents and purposes, for somebody who's a liberal, what is their reaction to someone like you?
Fear.
That's interesting.
Fear first. So fear of a couple of different things. Number one, they're scared to be called racist and Islamophobic if they agree with me, right? Which I find to be the most cowardly thing, to be honest. I just finished talking about people that go to prison and people getting gunned down in the streets for fighting for what they believe in.
Right.
And you're afraid that somebody might call you bad words. Like, nothing's going to happen to you.
Yeah.
Your freedom of speech is your First Amendment. And for you to censor yourself because you don't want people to say bad words to you, I feel like they're just spitting on all of the people that died for their freedom. Yeah. Really, like you are so lucky to be living in a society where you can say what you want and you are choosing not to, you know? So I find that incredibly cowardly that they say that they're just afraid. They're afraid to be called bad words, or they're afraid that somebody might judge them or think that they are Islamophobic or bigoted or whatever. And then also they fear Muslims, to be perfectly honest. I hear that a lot too. They're like, I agree with you, but I don't want to say anything because then I'm going to get the death threats. I'm going to be the one like Ayaan Hirsi Ali that has to have 24/7 security and whatever. Yep. Again, that's cowardly to me, because the more of us that speak up, the safer we all are. It was so hard for Ayaan and it was so hard for Salman Rushdie because they were the only voices out there. But now that there's the internet and now that there's social media and our voices are just like a big, loud, chorus, there's just a tsunami of voices coming from all over the world. Join in that chorus. You know what I mean? Be on the right side of this conversation instead of sitting there silently because you're too scared.
Yeah.
It's infuriating and it's maddening and it's also really, really sad.
It's sad. And you know what else it is? And we touched on this offline before we started talking, is that it's condescending. It's very condescending. And that's the part that really gets me as well. It's like you're essentially saying, well, these brown people, savage is gonna savage. Their culture is silly. So let's just let them do their silly nonsense and let them live in their ghettos and just forget about it. It's like we don't consider, or people in the West do not consider them the same as themselves. Like, all right, we could develop a nice society. 100%. Why couldn't they do it? Right?
100% agree with you. Yes. They say things like, but Muslim women are happy wearing the niqab. You think those women in Afghanistan like wearing that blue shit that they make them wear? Would you like it?
Do you remember that video? Do you remember that video? Sorry to bump in, but do you remember that video where they had it was this video going around on Twitter where they created this gym for women in Afghanistan, and all the women were dressed head to toe in a burqa, wearing the gloves, even covering their face, and just like doing something like that. And they were like, "Oh my God, latest gym in Afghanistan." I'm like, dude, come on.
We're supposed to celebrate that.
Did the Onion make this? Like, what is going on? This is a joke. But people were like, look at that, women outside working out.
So sad. Yeah. So sad that we're going to celebrate something like that for these women. Like, why don't they deserve the same freedom that women in the West deserve? Like, why are they being treated as subhuman? Why is there this assumption that they are some different species and that they somehow like to be, subjugated? It's really, like you said, it's that bigotry of low expectations.
That's right.
Just because they have brown skin and they come from a different area of the planet, suddenly they're not human anymore. Like, how are they so incredibly different from you, and their wants and needs are so different from yours?
Yeah.
And again, just like the judge, in their earnest attempt to be culturally sensitive, they are being horrifically racist. I mean, what could be more racist than that? To say, I deserve freedom here in the West because I have white skin and blonde hair. In fact, I should be able to free my nipple if I feel like it.
Right.
But women over there, let them cover their faces. Let them stay subjugated. They like it that way.
Yeah.
They're happy like that.
Yeah.
We don't want to say anything negative about that because that's their culture and that's how they choose to be.
Yeah.
Like, that's disgusting.
Yeah, it's disgusting, and it's insulting. It's especially insulting to the intelligence of these people.
Yeah.
Like you're basically making the assumption that this is the best they can do. All right, this is the best these poor people can do. Pat them on their heads and send them on their way. You know?
Yeah, you see that all the time. Like, you know, also in my podcast with Sam Harris, I talked about, you know, FGM. If you find a blonde woman cutting out the clitoris of her blonde daughter with a razor, that woman would go to prison. But a Somali woman does the exact same thing, and it's her culture. It's okay. She's just, you know, she doesn't know any better. She didn't realize it. She didn't know. She didn't know that taking a razor to her daughter's genital was a bad thing. You know, do you think that she is subhuman? Do you think that she is too stupid or to realize that you don't take a razor to a young child? Like, of
that's
course
what it appears,
she knows.
right? They think they're stupid. That's what it appears like, doesn't it?
That's exactly what they say. We're going to educate them. Like,
Goodness.
Don't you realize how condescending that is? That's actually what they do, is when they have these instances of FGM, the parents don't get prosecuted. They get educated. They sit them down and they say, no. We don't take razors to little girls' genitals. That's not nice. As if they're fucking morons. Like, you know what I mean? You wouldn't treat the blonde parents like that.
Yeah, no, you won't.
You wouldn't sit a blonde family down and be like, oh, we shouldn't do that. No. We don't take sharp things to people's genitals. Like, they are grown adults and they did something that is against the law. It's a heinous crime against another human being. The two girls, whether she's blonde or whether she's, you know, Somali, the two girls are going to suffer the exact same physical and mental anguish because of this action. And their two parents should be treated in the exact same way as well.
Yep. There's another thing that sort of dissolves into the ether when we talk about these conversations, is that whenever we're talking about, you know, the rights of Muslim women, and whether in Islamic countries, whether in Western countries, we don't talk about the responsibility of the men in these things. Like, it's almost something that's not spoken about. Well, they're wearing the hijab because they're privatizing their sexuality. They're wearing the burqa because, you know, they're showing their sort of humility towards God and all of that stuff. But it never comes up in these discussions that, well, shouldn't men have the responsibility to not leer at a woman's ankles should those ankles be exposed? Like, you know what? Like, shouldn't men just be like, all right, ankles, great, moving on, you know?
Yeah.
It's almost like there's no responsibility for the men here.
Again, that's that bigotry of low expectations. But in those societies, that's actually how it is. Like, you teach girls victim blaming. You teach them it's your responsibility to cover yourself up so that you don't get raped.
Yeah.
And when you are hearing those messages all the time, and I have countless stories like this, it's very common, of course, sexual abuse is very common in that society. You know, incestual sexual abuse is very common in that society too. But the girls don't speak up because they feel ashamed. They feel like it was their fault, that they did something wrong, because they have been raised to believe that. Yeah. They have been raised to believe that it is their responsibility, and that if a man takes advantage of them, it's because of something that they did. They didn't cover themselves up properly. Maybe their voice was too loud. Maybe they laughed too loud. Maybe they looked him in the eye instead of looking to the ground. Maybe they were wearing perfume. Honest to God, these are the things, right? But here in this society, we call that victim blaming, and we say we should not do that. And it doesn't matter what she's wearing. What matters is that he is a criminal, and he has done this sexual assault, and he's the one who is the bad guy in this scenario, But over there, victim blaming is the norm. That's the common thing. Like, so you have to go back like 50, not even 50. I don't even know how far you have to go back for it to be the same, because there really is no equivalent. But there needs to be that progress, again, cultural progress, which is really, really difficult when people are following a 1400-year-old book. Yes. Because the Quran itself says verbatim to women, cover yourselves up so that you do not get abused by men. It's telling them that. So the victim blaming is in the book from Allah himself. So how do you get a society to progress past that? Despite that, there are lots of women and men, less men, but there are lots of people in those societies that are pushing against these things, and that are demanding, feminism and equality and, emancipation of women. But the sad part is those people get shut down so quickly by either being imprisoned or being killed or just being socially ostracized. So they shut their mouth. And that's why I think it's so important for us in the West to support them, because they're a minority over there and they're fighting for the same values that we believe in over here. Yep. So I think it's really important that we support each other that share our values. We shouldn't be supporting people just because of their ethnicity or their color of their skin or whatever. Right. We should be supporting people because they share our values and that we also want the same things that they want.
Yeah, and just finally, a couple of things. One of the things that you mentioned that I feel like one of the problems that the Islamic world faces in terms of reform and in terms of things changing is that the people have this document that is considered the final, ultimate word of God, right? Mm-hmm. And it is the most perfect word of God. Like Muhammad got it absolutely perfected, right? So when you have a document that is the unalterable, perfected word of God, how do you change it? Or how can anything in it be wrong? How do we get around that?
Human nature. I'll tell you, it's human nature. People do not, following Islam is not fun. Right? It's horrible for women.
Well, for women at least, yeah.
For women, it's the worst. Yeah. But it's also not fun for men either, right? Like nobody, they even these men that are running around with their mustaches shaved and their beards long and pretending that they're all sunnah and whatever, those are the guys that are on like bestiality porn and like, right? Like where's the number one instances of porn in the world? Pakistan, right? And like really horrific kind of stuff. Like they are so oppressed and so suppressed and they everybody, like I feel if we got a separation of mosque and state, if we allowed people to make their own decisions, do you want to follow Sharia or do you want to follow secular laws? Do you want people would choose their freedom because they're human beings and human beings want their freedom. And, there will be obviously periods of adjustment and periods of fear. And, you can sort of see this kind of thing happening right now, like in Sudan and in Iraq and in Iran. They're fighting against their governments and they're demanding democracy. They're demanding freedom. Same sort of thing happened in Egypt not too long ago, too, with the Arab Spring. It's just human nature. Given a choice between freedom and this constrictive religion, this ideology that overtakes every single aspect of your life from the moment you open your eyes in the morning till the moment you close them at night, everything you do is dictated by this religion. You know, the vast majority of people are going to choose freedom. Of course, having said that, there will be a percentage of people who will want, you know, those are the ones like when you go to the Al-Hol camp in Syria and you find these women covered head to toe in black, still talking about supporting ISIS, women from Australia and from Finland and from England and from Germany, women that came from free societies, grew up as free women and chose their own subjugation and chose to become terrorists and chose to marry a terrorist and have children that they're going to raise to be terrorists. Those people will exist. That have, you know, there's nothing we can do about that. There will be people that are indoctrinated into that. But if we remove this force on people, if we remove the Sharia in the laws, then countless people will run out and find their freedom. And then it truly will be a smaller percentage of people that will choose to subjugate themselves. When we look at, you know, a country like Pakistan, for example, where they have their madrasas, where they're teaching little boys from infancy, or in Israel, in Palestine, where they have the puppets on TV with knives, teaching them how to slice the throat of Jews. Oh, God. This is, you know, this is what I'm talking about. When you have that indoctrination happening top down to little children from the very beginning, then of course you're going to have many, many people following that ideology that they've been indoctrinated in from birth. But if you take away that top down, if you take away their ability to teach that kind of garbage in schools, whether it's in Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or anywhere, take all of this and make them secular education and secular governments, then you will see less and less of this terrorism that we're seeing.
I think so. I think that is a very important first step, is to start at least separating church and state in these countries. That's an important first step. Finally, you know, one of the things that you said in your book is what really helped shape your worldview about the West and helped you sort of move out of Islam easier was your interactions with the so-called kuffars. That, you know, your family had always told you and your religion had always told you that these are devious, you know, shady people that will backstab you at the first chance they get. But every time you had an interaction with one of these people, you had 3 or 4 instances where you had interactions with kuffars that were wonderful. You know, that really changed your perspective on what a kuffar is supposed to be and what a kuffar actually is. And, oh, is the kuffar really as bad as I've been told they are? And that really helped shape your worldview. I'm curious. So many Muslims live in the West, but so many Muslims still have that. They hold on to that sort of anti-kuffar outlook. Is it that they just don't have these interactions with kuffars that you had? Or is it that the hold of the sort of literature is too hard?
The hold of the literature is so I cannot express. I can make a parallel to men. My whole life I was taught that they were rapists and evil and they're trying to get me and I have to constantly be protecting myself from them. And, you know, I remember the first time I ordered a pizza and I was home, it was just me and my daughter, and I was so nervous about ordering a pizza because then a strange man would know that I'm home alone and that there's no other man here, and then he might just come in and rape me. And these are actually, I wasn't Muslim anymore. I wasn't wearing hijab anymore. I wasn't I didn't think I was indoctrinated anymore. I didn't believe in heaven and hell anymore. But I was still scared of this guy coming to my door because if he sees me without hijab, maybe he'll rape me, right? It's absolutely, you know, it's illogical, but that's indoctrination. It takes so long to clean that out of your system. And, you know, this anti-kuffar sentiment that you're talking about, it's the same sort of thing. I cannot tell you how many ex-Muslims I meet that say things like, oh, I wish we could have ex-Muslim dating sites so that I could, find a
Wow.
partner. And I'm like, why do you need an ex-Muslim partner? You can have any partner you want in the world,
You're free
but
now. Do
you're
what you want.
free. But they still feel this, kind of fear towards people who are non-believers. If you're an ex-Muslim, then they feel safe with them because it's somebody who was a Muslim and now they're not. And so they kind of went through the same journey. But if it was somebody who was like born and raised, as an atheist or a Jew or a Hindu or something, like, oh, I don't know those people, it's illogical. And if you question them about it, they'll probably realize that what they're doing, but it's just so ingrained, and it takes a long time to, it's just brainwashing, right? Like it's so deep. I think it's really hard for people in the West to even have an understanding of how deep that brainwashing is, because we're such a free country here. We allow people to think from, my 2-year-old daughter, I would ask her, which shirt do you want to wear, the pink one or the blue one? We're constantly being given choices and making decisions, and we're allowed to. We have such freedom that is completely taken for granted. I mean, I didn't even know what kind of food I liked because I was never asked. It was never an option. I didn't know anything about myself. And so I think that it takes a lot of, just overcoming so much of that and just learning who you are and what's important to you, and just rebuilding yourself brick by brick.
It really is, because it's funny you say that. I have a guy friend who's a Hindu, and he's dating an ex-Muslim lady, and she tells him a very similar story as to like I obviously we were dating now and I like you and all, but when we first met, even though I didn't believe, I had this like thoughts in my heads of what I'd been told about Hindus, because Hindus are like pretty far down the ladder because of all the the idol worshippers, so that's bad. Then they have a partner with God, so to say. So that's bad. So they do all of the worst things that are possible in Islam. So she was like, even though I didn't believe, but I was still like, ugh, this guy.
Yeah. And anytime he would do or say something, she'd be like, oh, there it is.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
There's an interesting question that somebody asked me that I really wanted to ask you. This is Desi Murgi. He wants to ask, do you think unfair militarism in Arabic nation leads to this guilt complex in the West which leads to, apologism for Islamism among Western liberals? Like Western liberals see like some of the actions that America has taken in the Middle East, and then that leads to this certain amount of guilt. Do you think that adds to it?
I think that it does add to it. And I think that, it's misguided because, first of all, there's that idea that Muslims wouldn't hate the West except for this foreign policy stuff, military intervention. That's what makes them hate the West.
Right.
No, they would hate the West anyway because they're non-Muslims. They're going to hate you anyway. And ISIS was very clear with explaining this, regardless, until you all become Muslim, you're going to be hated and you're going to be fought. And Muslims have been fighting non-Muslims since way before America existed. They were going, how many Hindus did they kill in India way before America was a thing?
Yep.
So let's not pretend that America is the be all and the end all, and they're the ones that get to define what happens on the planet. No, you guys are new to this party. Okay. It's not all about you. Stop thinking that you're the center of the universe.
Right.
You're not. Just sit down over there. And what you recognize is that these are things that have been repeated throughout history, and it is only just being repeated in America in the same way it was repeated in so many other countries. So for them to think that they have some sort of, a bigger hand in it than they think, that it's just arrogance. It's just your typical putting themselves in the middle of every situation. And so, like I said in the podcast with Sam Harris, I said, as if Arabs were in the desert frolicking together, making sandcastles, everybody was happy. Nobody was hurting each other until American foreign policy happened. And now all of a sudden they're so angry ISIS formed.
Yeah, like after the formation of the State of Israel, that's when things went.
Yeah. I actually saw people online, not just people, it was Jeremy Corbyn that was talking about, it was because of the Iraq war that we now have these problems with the Muslim nations. It's like, you fucking idiot. Like, what happened before the Iraq war, first of all? Like, did 9/11 not happen before the Iraq war?
Yeah.
Like, and then if you go back in history, like I said, all of these battles that we were learning about as children, they all happened before America existed.
Yeah.
So it's misguided guilt for them to think that they have to overcorrect now. And that white guilt that they have is really, it really comes to, I think, again, it comes from a place of arrogance and condescension and them thinking that they are the rulers of the planet. And so they have to feel guilty for what has occurred. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I don't find that virtuous for people to have that white guilt. It's not virtuous. It's arrogant. And I think that person that was asking that question is correct, that does end up happening, that they do end up feeling like, oh, but we've hurt so many people in Iraq, so now we have to overcorrect by making a hijabi Barbie. And it's like, that is nonsensical. And through doing that, you're actually causing much more harm than good.
And I mean, somebody's made a really good point in the chat where they said that, Vietnam saw one of the most unfair wars against the US. They're not going into marketplaces and blowing themselves up or beheading children and, shit like that. That's not happening.
Exactly. And we're not all of a sudden supporting communism, although we sort of are.
There you go.
But you know what I mean? Like, we're not taking the bad parts of Vietnamese culture and putting that on the cover of magazines and supporting that. Yeah.
Yeah. And, lastly, before we wrap up, I get one objection from Muslim circles that I see hurled towards ex-Muslims very often is that, well, if you are a non-believer, if you do not believe anymore, if you leave this great faith, then how will you raise your child properly? What will you teach your children? What morality where will you get your morality from? That's a very common thing.
It's hilarious to me that people are willing to admit that were it not for the fear of hell, I would be raping and murdering and you know what I mean? I don't need to scare my children with these, nonsense fairy tales that they're going to be punished by some supernatural being if they don't do the right thing, right? They have an internal moral compass.
Right.
And they know the difference between right and wrong. And it's my duty as their mother to raise them right and to teach them, good from bad. And I don't need to lie to them in order to do that. You know what I mean? Like, we don't need to tell kids all year long, you're not going to get a gift from Santa Claus unless you're good. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's assuming that this child has no moral compass of their own. And in fact, this grown adult has no moral compass of their own and no conscience, and that they won't be able to tell the difference between honesty and dishonesty, or, being good and being bad.
Yeah, it's so silly because we have clear evidence of morality among tribal cultures thousands and thousands of years before Muhammad was even born, before Jesus walked the earth or anything like that. We have examples of some form of morality in chimpanzees, some form of morality in whales. I think I can say with a good amount of certainty that they did not have access to the Quran, but they were still able to manage it somehow. You know,
You never know.
you never know. You never know, though. Yeah. I mean,
Maybe there's
some
a
of
whale
them I did
Muhammad.
see wearing a little cap going into
Yeah.
it, so you never know. So, but yeah, I think it's just this insecurity that they have, that if they walk away from us and make a successful lives out of themselves, then they're going to tell other people that, hey, you don't need this. So I think that it's that insecurity playing
I
out.
mean, you're absolutely correct. And Yusuf Qaradawi, who was one of the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood, said exactly that. He said, if we did not have the punishment of execution for people who left Islam, then everybody would leave Islam. He literally said that.
Wow.
You know, and we're like, yes, that's true. And that's kind of what I was arguing earlier in this segment as well,
Right.
is that if we allowed people to choose Islam or no Islam, they're going to run for the hills, man. Who wants that? If you're a woman, you're going to run away. If you're gay, you're going to run away. If you're a man with any sense of, logic, then you're going to run away. Most people will.
Yeah. I think, one of the things that we need to now sort of ensure for any kind of change to happen, and if we really truly care about the benefit of women living in Islamic countries or Western countries, like people tend to say that they do, then I think it's important to pressure Islamic cultures to create some sort of a distance between the church and state.
Yes.
Unless that happens, we cannot expect any reforms until that starts to happen. In my opinion, that needs to be the first step. Or do you think that there's another first step that comes before?
No, I 100% agree with you. I think that is the very first step. You need to remove the shackles that are on people in their government and in their education system, and allow them the freedom to think. And I trust in humanity. And I know that people will do the right thing. I really do. I mean, I lived in Egypt for many years. I even lived in Qatar, which is like a very conservative Muslim country. And I was a college educator there. So a lot of most of my students were Qatari. They're Arab women and men. And I have exactly zero doubt that if people were allowed freedom, they would take it.
Right. Well, that's a very significant point that you've just made. And again, Yasmine, I just want to thank you for doing the show today. I think it's been very enlightening for me and my audience to be able to hear from you. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, absolutely. And again, guys, Yasmine's book is out now. It's called Unveiled: How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. You can buy it on Amazon. The link is provided in the description of this video. Our conversation will be available as a podcast soon as well. So we'll provide that on social media. So keep an eye out for that. Yasmine, just stick around while we go offline for a second as well. Other than that, guys, you can follow Yasmine on Twitter at YasMohammedXX. And her website is yasminemohammed.com. So you can follow her in those places as well. Again, guys, thank you very much for watching. Like, subscribe, share, comment, abuse, all of that fun stuff. So go ahead and do that. And we will see you for the next episode. Until then, stay happy, stay healthy, and I will see you guys soon.